someone might say something like this: if we allow medical support to be removed from terminally ill patients, next thing you know, we will allow medical support to be removed from patients who are not terminally ill. And once that happens, what's to stop government from deciding to actively kill people who are not desirable? Before you know it, as soon as you reach a certain age or come to a certain time of disability, the government will kill us all. All right, so that is a slippery slope style argument. If you remove medical support from terminally ill patients, maybe later they'll remove medical support from patients who are not terminally ill. Well, then maybe we'll move not from just from removing medical support, maybe we'll move to actively, giving people drugs to kill them. And then maybe we'll means test everybody. We'll do it for financial or social reasons. Before you know it, government is a massive killing machine. All right, this is a slippery slope style argument because A does not lead to B, B does not lead to C, C does not lead to D. At every point, there can be a complete cessation of the supposed chain of events. In fact, in our country, we do allow medical support to be removed from terminally ill patients. That has not led to widespread removal of medical support from patients who are not terminally ill. And it certainly has not led to acceptability in our society of active euthanasia. Okay, so if the events in the chain are incredibly likely, 70, 80, 90% at each link in the chain, then maybe you don't have a fallacy. But in almost all cases, these conclusions that are based on a linking of events one to the next are going to be fallacious. Okay, so that is our slippery slope fallacy. And this leads us to our final fallacy of the video, and that is the fallacy known as weak analogy. In a weak analogy argument, there's a similarity between two cases. And the arguer says, well, A is similar to B in this way, therefore we can conclude that A is similar to B in some other way. So the argument is based on similarity between two cases, but this similarity is either not relevant to the conclusion, or it ignores relevant dissimilarities between the two cases. So for instance, someone might say, you would never buy a pair of shoes without trying it on first. Therefore, you should never get married without having premarital sex. So the analogy here is that you're going to make some sort of a commitment to something and you want to try it out first, right? And so that if it is the case that you would not buy a pair of shoes without first trying it on, you probably should not buy a wife or a husband without first having sex with them. That's the argument. But we can see that there are relevant dissimilarities between the two cases, right? Choosing a spouse is far more important than choosing a pair of shoes. If you choose a pair of shoes and you don't like it or it doesn't fit and you forget to take them back, it is not at all a big deal. If you choose a spouse and it doesn't go well, that is going to be a terrible event. Getting a divorce is a traumatic event and a costly event, and it leaves wounds for the rest of your life. And so that is a significant disanalogy between the case of the shoes and the person. The other thing is that trying on a pair of shoes is not an emotionally or spiritually vulnerable thing to do. But having sex obviously is. So having sex with someone is a very intimate sort of thing to do. It's a sort of thing that makes one feel vulnerable emotionally and spiritually. And it's something that for many people is a very precious sort of thing to be involved in. And none of that is true with trying on a pair of shoes. Finally, if you're a person of faith, most faith traditions have something to say about the issue of premarital sex, whereas they don't have anything to say about whether you should try on shoes. So what I've done here is suggested that while there is a surface similarity between the two cases, which is why some people might think it's a good argument, there are significant and relevant dissimilarities between the two cases. And that's how you identify an argument by weak analogy. You're able to point out relevant dissimilarities between the two cases and these dissimilarities will lead us to reject the conclusion. Okay, another argument along these lines is you cannot have a healthy garden unless you pull out the weeds. Likewise, you cannot have a healthy society unless you destroy all criminals. Right? So, if you want to have a healthy garden, you've got to get rid of all the weeds, which involves killing the weeds. Right? And so the person concludes from that, the same thing is true about societies. If you want a healthy society, you have to kill the criminals, because criminals are like weeds that choke out the healthy plants. Now, there is a surface similarity between the two cases, but there are relevant dissimilarities that will cause us to reject the conclusion. For one thing, weeds do not have a right to life. Criminals do. From a Christian perspective, weeds are not made in the image of God. They're beautiful in their own way, but they don't have that intrinsic dignity that comes from being made in the image of God. Criminals, as poor as their choices have been, are human beings made in the image of God, and Christians at least, and many other people do believe, therefore, that human life is valuable and sacred. So there's a significant difference between these two cases. A weed is something not very valuable. In a cosmic sense, a human being is about the most valuable thing that there is on the planet. And so killing people is problematic. Another disanalogy, there's nothing hypocritical that you're doing when you're weeding the garden. But if you're putting to death criminals, if you're killing people for killing people, arguably there is some sort of incongruity there in your actions. Okay, so those are two examples of the weak analogy fallacy. An argument is based on a similarity between two cases. But this similarity is not really relevant to the conclusion, and it ignores really important dissimilarities between the two cases. All right? Now, your weak analogy fallacies will often have certain catchphrases that will clearly indicate that this is this is the fallacy that we have in front of us. Sometimes they'll say, just like in a garden, we would pull out the weeds. Similarly, in a society, to make a society healthy, we need to pull out the criminals. So they're using similes, like and as, and that sort of thing. But it's not always the case. And so when you're looking for weak analogy arguments, don't get hung up completely on those sorts of key phrases. Anytime that an argument is based on a similarity between two cases, and that similarity is not really an instructive one, and it ignores important dissimilarities, we have the fallacy of weak analogy. And so that's all I have for you right now. I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion of fallacies of weak induction, and I will have a chance to talk with you soon about some other sorts of issues in critical thinking. So for now, farewell and take care.